Hello friends, Orri here, and welcome to my somewhat comprehensive guide to Molten Strike with the Zenith. This skill is not intended to be a league starter, as it's a endgame stacker build, but in this video I'm going to try and show you how to do it anyway. So, for the sake of credibility, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me and my history with the Zenith. So, I first started playing Zenith in the Settlers League after watching One Mana Left video. And I've played it every league since. I've league started it from day one all the way up until multi-mirror investment. And over the past few leagues, I've helped a lot of people with their Zenith builds in the One Mana Left Discord. Also, shout out to Connor for not immediately nuking me from orbit for posting my Twitch link in chat. Appreciate it. But this has also given me a lot of insight into how early scaling feels in the build and what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to the build and how to remedy those issues. So, should I play this build? What is it good at? What is it bad at? Well, for starters, Zenith has extremely high damage, the capability to be extremely tanky, relatively fast, and with slight variations to the build and the setup, you can do any map mod in the game. On top of that, because it is a stacker archetype, you can also put as much money into it as you can farm. Alright, so, for some cons. Well, for starters, you're a melee build, so range will obviously be a bit of an issue, which translates to the league mechanics, which you can run being a little bit restrictive, namely Legion or Breach, but you know, who the fuck's doing Breach anymore anyway. And other than those two, maybe Ultimatum sometimes can be a little bit tricky, depending on if you get unlucky or not. One downside that is not luck dependent is the fact that Zenith, most leagues, is pretty expensive. The barrier to entry isn't necessarily super high, but the cost of items gets very expensive very fast, namely stuff like early Mage Blood or a Purity of Fire Sublime Vision, Original Sin. Alright, Mr. Streamer, you've convinced me. I'm playing Zenith. But how exactly do I play Zenith? What makes it work? How do I scale the build? And well, lucky for you, I'm going to explain everything to you. I will be going over core uniques, I will be going over some scaling vectors, and lastly, I will be going over crafting. So before telling you how the skill gets better, I should probably tell you how the skill itself works. Zenith is a fairly straightforward skill where you swing your sword and a regular Molten Strike ball will fall. And the Zenith part of the Molten Strike of the Zenith comes every 5th hit, where your 5th hit will do 600% more, not increased, more damage with projectiles, as well as adding 5 additional projectiles to that attack. Adding quality to your Molten Strike of the Zenith will make this 600% 800% more, so quality is a fairly important thing you want on your Molten Strike gem. This also results in the primary goal of your character being to hit that 5th attack as often as you can. There is an interaction with the multi-strike gem that will delay when this 5th attack happens, but I will get into that at a later point in the video. So we get to question 1. How do I achieve attacking as fast as possible? And how does strength stacking play into this? Well, the first step in the strength stacking process is in the Juggernaut Ascendancy Undeniable, which reads, gain accuracy rating equal to twice your strength, and 1% increased attack speed per 150 accuracy rating. The second thing that really enables this is the Crown of Eyes, which reads, increases and reductions to spell damage also apply to attacks at 150% of their value. It's simple, but on its own it's not super valuable. So we scale this number by clicking Iron Will on our passive tree, which reads, Strength's damage bonus applies to spell damage as well. Well, what is the base increase of strength? It is 1% melee physical damage for every 5 strength. With the Crown of Eyes and this notable on your tree, you basically double dip on this. Third and final for now, scaling vector is the Replica Alberon's Warpath, which gives you 1 to 80 flat chaos damage per 80 strength. It's super important to note that on Replica Alberon's, it says the line cannot deal non-chaos damage, which, for now, removes any and all value from any increases to physical or elemental damage, flat percentage, anything. Another unique, which really accelerates the scaling, is the Iron Fortress, which has a line reading, Strength's damage bonus instead grants 3% increased melee physical damage per 10 strength. And now keep in mind of the double dipping that your Crown of Eyes does with your Iron Will, and this chest easily doubles your damage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I also want to tell you about some unintuitive mods that decrease or increase your damage. For some mods that seem like they would increase your damage, increased area of effect and increased projectile speed actually lower your damage. Why? Because Zenith balls spread out more with each of these mods. Area of effect doesn't make your balls larger, they just make them spread out more. And increased projectile speed does essentially the same. Which also means, in turn, that reduced area of effect and less projectile speed actually end up being a damage gain. Why? Because your balls fall closer to the target that they originated from, dealing more single target damage. Whilst none of these mods will occur randomly, other than acceleration shrines, which you can click off by right-clicking the icon top left of your screen, there is one source of increased projectile speed which might get you, which is the returned projectile support, which gains increased projectile speed with quality, which is bad. So you always want to keep this at 0 quality if possible. In the description, I will have a huge POB linked with various stages of gear progression that I really recommend you follow. It will have various stages of gear progression, all the way from when you're on the Twilight Strand, just getting your bearings, all the way up until you have an Original Sin and a Purity of Fire Sublime Vision on your character. The aims of these POBs are not to show you what your character should look like, but more how you should tackle issues as you face them, and what increments of gear I recommend you buy. Now, the prices of these items may vary league to league, or week to week even, but I've tried my very best to be as fair and as conservative as possible when it comes to mods on the items or accessibility at certain stages in the game. Also, there are some items in here that might seem out of reach, but you do not have to buy these in the order as they show up in the POB. There are some minimums for certain techs that are applied in the build, such as permanent overleach, where you need a certain amount of reservation for it to actually work, but I will cover that as we approach them. Also, real quick, this video was recorded after the patch notes, but before PUB got updated. Nothing really changed for Zenith, so all of this is still accurate, unless the build is bugged. I won't be going over everything in detail, but I will point out some key nodes, tell you what is optional, and then I'll also show you some of the changes that you make tree to tree and why. Gearing mostly speaks for itself, but I'll share my opinion on what sort of order you should try to upgrade in. The early Zenith POB is what I've kind of settled on to be the bare minimum to have Zenith be playable. Concisely, it is 2 clusters, the mandatory uniques, and high enough level to spend all of your mandatory points. I advise rushing a 3rd cluster when you start moving up from this stage. The early Zenith tree is mainly focused on early game tankiness, since damage doesn't really show up in this build until you get at least a Nimbus, as well as laying the groundwork for the tree moving forward. So for the early tree, there is not super much I want to comment on, other than make sure that your Timeless Jewel has at least one good mod on your notable. Towards the end of the video, I will put in a little segment on how to look for a good Timeless Jewel. Make sure you get these 2 notables. They are very important and contribute a lot of your damage. And this crit reduction mastery is extremely good, especially early game. Moving on to skills, this will be your 6th link until you get a Nimbus. You can change out your greater multiple projectiles for slower projectiles, which will be a substantial increase to your single target damage, though your clear will suffer a little bit. There is nothing else really going on here worth talking about. This automation setup is really nice. This also gives you Wither, which is a lot of damage, especially early on. And do not automate your Immortal Call. As for items, your sword is extremely basic. You really do not need something super fancy to start off. And all of your flask will really want to have this gain 1 charge when hit prefix. This will essentially guaranteed permanent uptime on all of these. Moving on to the mid-investment tree, there is a few things to talk about here. Namely, our starting pathing being different to enable some split personalities down here. as well as this rune graft of treachery, which will enable some blood magic technology, which we will also press now. So why did I decide on this setup? What are the benefits of it? Well, petrified blood essentially staggers every hit that you take, and a very large function of this build is its recovery. Its recovery is extremely good, to the point where if you don't get one shot, you will live practically anything. And petrified blood is a really large part in enabling that, because any hit you take is staggered, and then it just gives you time to recover it back. So explaining what this does a little bit, this basically puts you at 51% unreserved life together with petrified blood, which means that you cannot, under any circumstance other than a life flask, gain health above 50%. And since we don't use a life flask, because our HP number is so high that any life flask wouldn't really do that much, basically means that the top half of our life doesn't really matter, and we reserve stuff on it. And we reserve petrified blood itself, in conjunction with Arctic armor, being roughly 20% PhysDR. And then we use Eternal Blessing together with Purity of Elements for essentially a free large aura. Eternal Blessing states that you cannot have multiple things reserving mana, but it doesn't say anything about life. It also says you can only reserve one aura, but Arctic armor nor petrified blood have the aura tag, so these are essentially just free to run. So how you hit this reservation breakpoint is you need 2 of 3 things: the rune graft of treachery with an enlightened 3, and or with the 90% reservation implicit on the Crown of Eyes. As for the items in this part of the build, this is where we get our first double influence sword, which I will show you how to craft at the end of the video, as well as a synth belt with % strength. Cyclopean is a really good substitute for this, but this is the next step up, so I decided to put it in here. As well as the aforementioned split personalities and an Emperor's Might. These tend to be quite cheap, but if they're anything more than like 5-10 divines, just ignore it completely and just slap on a regular jewel. So the only real change in gems when you get a Nimbus is you change out your return projectile support for either slower projectiles or GMP, depending on which one you decided to keep. I do want to explain why getting a Nimbus is such a big deal. It is basically because the returning projectiles support gem has a 66% less damage multiplier, which you change out for a whole additional support gem, which is usually around 30% damage. So that in and of itself doubles your damage. And this is also a point where I feel comfortable dropping Instant Leech for another 35% damage on the slower proj wheel. As for items, obviously the Nimbus goes in here. We also have a Synth Amulet now with % strength. We also put in a Sublime Vision with Purity of Elements for some max res and some PoE effects, so we're even less starved on resistances. And we have a Forbidden Flesh and Flame combo for Defy Pain. This is basically Defiance of Destiny, but a little bit worse. But it makes you functionally immortal to anything that doesn't kill you. And it even heals you if the hit is small enough. As well as a Watcher's Eye with just some Chaos Res on it. I do want to point out that because Nimbus is quite expensive, you can make any of these purchases before you make a Nimbus, especially if they're less than like 15 divines. This Forbidden Flesh and Flame set is usually about 4 divines for the combo. This Sublime Vision is about 2 divines a week into the league, and the Synth Neck is also sub 10 divines most of the time. The post-image pre-Mage Blood section is basically just kind of a little bit of a checklist before you decide on if you want to get a Mage Blood or if you want to stay Synth Belt. The next PoE in this is Mage Blood Swap. It doesn't have a Synth Belt PoB, but you can just keep a Synth Belt and just work your character around that. As for the Mage Blood tree, there's not super much different. I add a Rune Graft of the Warp for comfort and change out the duration nodes on the fortification wheel to max fortification. For the item tab post Mage Blood, I add in +2 strike. These can be really expensive to craft if you get unlucky on conflict orbs, but it shouldn't be too bad. It's just the implicit. And then also a helical ring. Alright, onto the Purity of Fire Sublime Vision setup. If you've never had a Purity of Fire Sublime Vision before up until now, well, congratulations. I will explain to you how to make it work. So your lethal pride has to be of the Arakiata Conqueror in order to change this notable to Tempered by War, which converts 50% of cold and lightning damage to fire, as well as needing a Watcher's Eye with a max roll on the cold and cold and lightning taken as fire, in conjunction with Sublime Vision itself, which puts you at 100% cold and lightning conversion to fire. This means that you are immune to penetration, something like Shaper Balls, which penetrate cold usually, you are not immune to. You still take the damage, but the penetration bit of it you are immune to. And this is a insane boost to your tankiness, as well as making it so you only really have one res to care about. On top of this, your auras will look a little bit different. You need an Empower on your period of fire. I also link an Enhance to it just for some quality. Quality on this gives you just fire res, which is good to overcap in case of exposure, stuff like that. So if this is your first time having an original sin, congratulations. If you might recall at the start of the video when I was like, Replica Alberons, it says the line, cannot deal non-chaos damage, which removes any and all value from any increases to physical or elemental damage. Well, with an original sin that changes, Fizz is still completely useless, but elemental damage is converted to chaos damage. This is also the reason why you get something like Flat Lightning on Mirror Swords, and the Flat Lightning on Mirror Swords gets affected by your volatility support, so lightning damage just has a lot more value than other damage types. I also want to show you a aspirational build that I put together for roughly my day 5 of the current league. The new league mechanic, or the new power creep that they add, where you can add a support gem to a level 2020 gem. Zenith is actually a really lucky beneficiary of this, where one of our supports, Endurance Charge on Melee Stun, which was usually found on your sword as a prefix, the level 1 version of this gem gives its entire benefit. Quality adds nothing, and levels don't add anything either. It's 4% more damage per endurance charge is static across all levels, so that will be the best in slot gem to get on your Molten Strike of the Zenith. This enables something really fun. So the Foulborn Red Nightmare has a mod that converts all fire resistance and all Ellie res to fire damage converted to chaos damage at 100% of its value. So this is where we opt to drop Unrelenting and take the Lycia Bloodline. This is actually buffed in the next league, and it will be 67% converted to chaos damage. And then alongside with this node right here being another 15 and this being another 8, we are at 90%. And then with these two tattoos here, changing it to fire res, we're at 102%. Essentially just 100. That lets us recraft our sword to have flat fire per strength and basically get a mini original sin very early on. Well, at the cost of corrupting the right support gem on this. I will also put this POB in the description. This is kind of what I want my character to look like on day 5 or so of the league. It depends a little bit on the prices, but this is something you can look at. Welcome to the Timeless Calculator Guide. I will put a link to this website in the description. So you're just going to come here and click Skill Tree View. And you're going to click on this node right here at the bottom. And then we're going to click Lethal Pride, Conqueror. Any of these are okay, except for when you have a Purity of Fire, Sublime Vision, in which case you want a Rakiata. So let's just shop ahead for that. Fuck it. And then on the stats, we will click Strength %. And then we will click plus to Strength. And then we want a minimum of 1 of each. So I guess this is a pretty healthy minimum. And then all of these nodes are lit up, which we don't want. So we're just going to click on Deselect, which will unclick all of them. And now we can click the ones that we actually click. So we click these 3, and then these 3. Make sure you don't accidentally click the top one. That'll be I've made a mistake before. So on these nodes, these are all the ones we really want. We want any node that gives us at least 1 of each. And then you just click search, and you'll pop these up, and you just click the trade link, and I'm not logged in. All right, and we're back. We are successfully logged in. So when you click the trade link, it might say some silly shit like in person, online, and hardcore ruthless. Just adjust where necessary, and you can just click search, and the jewels will pop up. And for example, this jewel, for example, is really good because obviously it has a bunch of stuff we want. But for example, you don't care about which conqueror you want. You can just select all of them. Just so happens that only this guy has one. We can click on more. Oh, you can change it here. The more you know. But you can also click on the big trade link at the top, which will give you more options. You know, these are all listed. There's 177. So 10,733. If we look for that on the side, 10,733. So we got double flat and a % strength. So this is pretty good. Is there anything else that we care about this? This regen is nice. Essentially free. This leech doesn't do anything, but it's a 3 module, right? And we can just go pick this up for 50 chaos. So that's how you use this. You can be more specific. You can add more mods. Reduced crit is really nice. Max life is fine. Fire res, it's kind of okay, but lower priority. Regen is okay, but it's lower priority. Rage on hit, this is probably the most valuable node that you can get on this, in my opinion. So if I like, this is a search that I would do in the later stage of the game, and then try and pick up this essentially perfect jewel. Only has one bad stat, and it's regen, and it exists for 90 divines. This rage on hit basically saves you a skill point, because it's the one that you would click over here, and it just basically gives you a skill point back for the small price of 90 div, which you know, depending on who you ask, is worth it. So yeah, that's kind of how you use this. I'm blazing through it because it's not very complicated. You click the jewel you want, you click the conqueror you want, then you put in some stats that you care about, the minimum of them. You know how weightings work, and yeah, that's how you use this. One thing to watch out for is that if you accidentally leave these small nodes clicked, because it's a lethal pride, the small nodes will give you flat strength as well. So a bunch more of these will show up. So you know how it was 5 matches and there was only 1? Well, all of a sudden we have a bunch more matches because we didn't unclick these small nodes, which is worth knowing, so you don't run into that mistake. Alright, and now we're at the crafting part of the guide. I have prepared some swords here because this is quite RNG heavy. First, I'll discuss the bases. There are 2 sets of bases here. These are socketed 20% more attack damage, and these are all endurance charge and melee stun. And then for either Lycia or Original Sin, I also have some Hunter for strength with some 20% more socketed here. So the way that Awakener orbs work is you click the sword you want to delete first, and then the sword you want to keep second. I have the 6-linked Reaver here as an example that if you buy a pre-6-linked sword, when you hit your Awakener's orb, you don't have to go and 6-link it after. This is nice if you want to throw on like an Elder influenced orb on an already pre-6-linked non-influenced Reaver sword before you start rolling for this mod, and then it'll just save you some money. So I'll be Awakening orbing all of these because it's quite RNG heavy, and we are looking to land an open prefix on these. The last sword we hit is ideal for crafting. Once you have a sword like this with 2 prefixes and 2 or less suffixes, you want to take some divines to the crafting bench. Craft prefixes cannot be changed. And then depending on the state of the economy, you either want to hit a Veiled Exalted Orb or a Veiled Chaos. This depends on if it is cheaper to hit the Veiled Exalt as opposed to hitting another Awakener's Orb. And when we hit this, we are going to want to look for a prefix, which we happen to hit here. And on the Unveil, we want to hit either Spell Damage or Chaos Pen. And here we hit Chaos Pen, which is the better mod. And we got lucky with our Veiled Exalt hitting the other suffix here and not the crafted mod. And once your sword is in a state like this, with 3 prefixes and the blocking prefixes, you want to reforge speed. And then depending on the outcome, you might want to go again. We hit movement speed here. As for what tier of attack speed you want to settle on, I would settle on anything higher than like 20%. So a sword like this is something I would keep. And finally, to finish your sword, you want to craft double damage focus. The reason why you take double damage focus or regular double damage is because regular double damage relies heavily on your double damage proccing on your Zenith hit, and when you have focus double damage, you just have a little bit of a higher chance of that hitting on your Zenith. So this is basically just speedrunning a finished sword. But what if you get a little bit unlucky and you get a sword like this with 3 prefixes, but one of them is useless? Depending on the state of your stash, I would honestly just be completely fine with this. This is a scenario where I would just craft attack speed and consider your sword finished. And a sword like this is unironically something I would use all the way up until when I recraft for an original sin or lycia. What do you do in a situation like this, where you do have 2 correct prefixes, but 3 suffixes? Unfortunately, you are gonna have to be at the mercy of an annulment orb. Luckily on this one we hit, but say in the event that you miss your annulment orb, you have to go again. When your sword is in a state like this, there is no salvaging it really. You could decide to save it if you want to recombinate it with a different sword, but the odds of you hitting 2 or more mods is fairly low. It is also worth noting that the 3 to 5 fire damage that I am sourcing from the Hunter is also available on Shaper. But the reason why I source it from the Hunter is because Shaper is also conflicting with the 20% more socketed, and hitting both prefixes naturally is significantly less likely than just hitting an Awakener's Orb on the Hunter mod. In a situation like this one, where you have 2 correct prefixes, 1 dead prefix, 2 completely useless suffixes, I would argue it is probably worth it to just hit up a prefix can be changed, and hitting a reforge speed on it anyway. This is also a good base where I can show you how you should climb in case you end up in this scenario. We just craft the lowest tier of crit chance, and then we hit an Exalted Orb, hit the worst mod in the game, and we finish it with double damage focus. So once you have a sword like this that you're happy with, you can harvest enchant it with the increased attack speed per 8 quality. Note the quality on this sword being higher than 24%. This will give you 1 additional % attack speed, and depending on the price of the base, it is probably worth buying. So crafting the belt, the necklace, the ring, and the gloves are literally all the same thing. You want to buy Deafening Essences of Rage, and you just want to hit it until you get some suffixes you're happy with. You get some shit like this. Craft suffixes cannot be changed. You reforge life. Maybe 3 times, and you're done. As for the necklace, you just basically want to hit Deafening Essence of Rage until you hit all attributes of a decent tier. Something like this will last you the whole game. As for gloves, you want to get Fractured Life, ideally, because it will be the hardest mod to fill out at the end. And again, we just hit the Deafening Essence of Rage. So we have some suffixes we are happy with. Then depending on how much money you have, when you have a glove situation like this, you could craft suffixes cannot be changed. Throw a Veil Orb at it. And then you can be sad that you didn't hit PDR focus. Side note, these gloves are fucking stupid, and I really wish I had these in League in this many essences. And then as for a ring, you want to do the exact same stuff, and finish your craft off with a Warlord Exalted Orb if you want to get a Bound by Destiny setup. And then finally for the cluster. Crafting your cluster will be the same regardless of the eye level of the cluster, but if you can get one between eye level 50 and 67, you basically pull off a lot of top end mods and make hitting this significantly easier. The fossils that you want to put in here are going to be Shuddering, Pristine, and Dense. And the nodes that you want to look for on these as a third node, other than the 2 marshals, are Graceful Execution, Sure-Footed Striker, or Brutal Infamy. And here we hit a cluster, and if you hit something like this that is just bare 3 nodes, there is nothing that can go wrong if you exalt it. And that concludes the crafting section of the video. I was editing the video and I remembered that there were some key things that I missed out on, so I'm just going to quickly rapid fire some information, starting with an additional free aura in the very, very late game. Back when I was explaining the minimum reservation requirement, I gave you 3 options: RMR Implicit on Helm, Runegraft of Treachery, and an Enlighten 3. If you get all 3 of these and make your Enlighten 3 and Enlighten 4, you can fit in a Blood and Sand and still be 51% perfectly. Here's my Helm, here's my Enlighten 4, here's my Treachery Runegraft. This was my character from last league. I also didn't explain the interaction with Molten Strike. Whenever you hit with your Molten Strike, the additional repeats don't count towards your Zenith. With a regular Molten Strike, you would have to hit 15 times before your Zenith part actually procs. So it is just a DPS increase, but if you have less attack speed, your Zenith's less often, so it'll feel worse, even though it is technically a net DPS increase. I also wanted to give some Forbidden Jewel options, because there are a few that are good for us. If you are playing Lycia, you can Flesh and Flame back Unrelenting. This node is extremely powerful. It's really, really good defensively. Defy Pain is something that I choose most leagues, just because of how comfortable it makes small hits. Core Dancer is also really good. At the very minimum, it saves the instant leech nodes on your tree. Then Aspect of Carnage is just straight up a blanket 40% more at the cost of 10% increased damage taken, which is a trade-off worth making if the league doesn't end up being super hard. Conversely, if the league is super hard, Indomitable Resolve is going to be your best Forbidden node. The only problem with this being that this usually is about 1.5 to 2 mirrors for the set, basically every league. I also want to quickly discuss Valakos. This item is always disgustingly overpriced, and you can just kind of balance your all-res already in the mid-80s. Spending 2 jewel sockets on this isn't really worth it in my opinion. I also don't have any explicit immunities of Corrupted Blood in the build. There is a mastery you can click over here. Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you. But another source that you can have is because you have such a large amount of rare jewels, you can just Vol Orb some. These 3 mods are not super expensive. They'll cost you about a divine maybe. You can just Vol Orb them, maybe you get lucky. I also wanted to talk about Pantheons really quickly. No exceptions, you always go Soul of Lunaris as your big Pantheon. This is just stupid. And for your minor Pantheon, you have some options. I think this one is probably the best one all around. I also think Ralikesh is viable if you die to bleeds a lot, which you shouldn't. And then situationally, the poison one is good if you roll it on your T17 mods. Also, how to set up your config, because calculating PoB damage for Zenith is a little bit tricky sometimes. As a rule of thumb, your Zenith always stays on 1, and then when you buy a Nimbus, you set this to 2. Then time spent stationary, just put it on 1, because when you're leap slamming, you're considered stationary, you're not actually considered moving, and you should be leap slamming more than you walk. Frenzy charges are on. You can turn this off if you only boss, because I do not opt for the frenzy charge generation on your tree. I just don't think it's necessary. If you use endurance charges, I sure hope so. Very focused. If you want to pad your PoB, you can click this for sure. I definitely do. Also make sure you have Fortify on. As for the funny number on Rage, PoB already considers your rage cap, so you can put any number in here above your cap and it will just consider it your cap. And then for the effective DPS part here, this is pretty important. Your projectile travel distance doesn't matter super much as long as it's more than 0. And if you don't see that, you do not have point blank clicked on your tree. As for number of withered stacks, if you hover your withering step, it'll tell you in PoB how many withered debuffs you inflict. But if instead of having withering step, you have a source of wither on hit, you can just put this to 15 because it'll max out almost immediately. And then finally, a little recap for the changes for 328. Functionally for the setup, it is the same build as it has been for the past 2 leagues, but the power creep of letting us get an additional support gem, being endurance charge on melee stun, giving us a lot of power, and enabling a setup like this one where you go Lycia. There's also a weapon swap setup that I would recommend, where you get a Time-Worn Claw with a Red Blade banner, with Enduring Cry, More Duration, and Urgent Orders support linked. Yeah, this is especially nice when you enter a map and you just need some endurance charges to start, or if you're degenning somewhere and you just need a bunch of regen really quickly. That concludes my Molten Strike of the Zenith guide for 328. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to join me on my stream over on twitch.tv/Orri_XDD. The link to my Discord will also be in the description. Feel free to join there. You can ask as many questions as you want about the build, interactions, mechanics. With everything said, thank you very much for watching, and have a good 328.